Hey, yeah. So I got cut off, and I really now I'm like really wanting to talk about that because it's fun. So we're talking about there's a thing in the Bible, and it says that the part that I know verbatim, which is only the last half of it. It says it's describing this guy, and it describes him as he would not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continuously, saying, "Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner." So the contrast and comparison was the Bible was saying there's this guy, the guy wearing the big religious robe with the giant cross hanging from his neck, carrying the big sign, and calling out to everybody in public how God is real and everything. God, you must believe in God and everything. That God didn't like him, but God favored the man who would not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continuously, saying, "Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner." God favored the guy who would not so much as look to heaven over the guy that was wearing the big robe and the big giant cross and, holding the big sign and walking down the street telling everybody about how important it is to believe in God and everything. God favored the guy who would not so much as look to heaven. And so, and I explained, my curiosity about this guy who would not so much as look to heaven had a lot to do with, uh, why would God favor him? And so I was looking into, and really it's because if there is a God, especially if the God was just, if there was a just, fair God who believed in justice and fairness and all this stuff and love and everything, well, wouldn't you want favor of that God? Yeah, you would. And so that's what drew my curiosity to the man who would not so much as look to heaven, because I wanted to understand what is this? Because if God favored the man who would not so much as look to heaven over the guy wearing the robe with the big cross hanging and the big sign and going down the street pronouncing to everybody that he's a godly man and is trying to bring people to God, well, I want to be favored of a God that's just and fair and kind and loving. And so God favored the man who would not so much as look to heaven. But it's kind of confusing because you're like, well, why would God favor the man who would not so much as look to heaven? Isn't that what we're supposed to do, is look to heaven, and right? And so I started really looking into this, like the man who would not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continuously, saying, "Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner." And I'm like, beat his breast continuously? And it confused me because when I read that, it's like I'm imagining a guy beating his breast continuously. And so I'm thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. See, the intention is to get a person, the reader, to think. And so that's the whole point, is to get the reader to think about that instead of just read it and then continue reading on. That's like assigned to, like, there's more to this phrasing than just surface level. And so these things are designed to get a person to think. So then you have to go back again to would not so much as look to heaven. Well, yeah, that is kind of a cryptic, elusive type phrasing, because I thought the point is to look to heaven. So why would God favor the guy that doesn't look to heaven? Why am I thinking that the purpose is to look to heaven? Is it to look to heaven? what is going on here? I'm totally confused. Well, what does it mean to look to heaven? Well, I mean, like to look to God, to believe in God. Well, wait a second. If I'm assuming that to look to heaven means to believe in God, yet God favors the guy who would not so much as look to heaven, like, what does all this mean? And why am I so confused? Why am I even wasting my time? I should just continue reading on, or just put the book down and, watch TV or something. But because if there was a God who was just and fair and kind and loving, well, I would want favor of that God. And God favors the man who would not so much as look to heaven over the man who's wearing the big religious gown with the big cross and the big sign and telling everybody how important it is to believe in God. Okay, so I decide I'm going to look into this. I don't care. Because I want to. I don't care what anybody thinks about me. I don't care. I really want to understand this. Why am I having such a hard time understanding this? So God favors the guy who would not so much as look to heaven over the guy who is wearing the religious garb and the giant cross and the big sign telling everybody how important it is to believe in God. And God favors the guy who would not so much as look to heaven. So who is this guy? What is this? Okay, so let's go back. Would this guy that God favors is described as he would not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continuously, saying, Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner. What does this mean? And how could anybody claim that they have understanding of what this means? I mean, would anybody really believe that this guy, so would not so much as look to heaven means he's not looking at the sky, he's just looking down, and beat his breast continuously just means he's just pounding his chest. Okay, so if I'm supposed to believe this, so the guy that God favors, this is how he's illustrated. It's like this. And it's like, I'm like, no, there can't be that's what it literally means. And even if it does, it's gotta mean, there's more meaning to it than that. There's more than just surface level where it's just this guy who won't look to the sky, he's only looking down and he's just physically pounding his chest. It can't just solely mean that, because it doesn't make sense. To me, anyways. Maybe that's what it means, or maybe there's some other interpretation. Maybe it doesn't literally mean that he wouldn't look to the sky and he's looking down, but it means would not so much as look to heaven. So what does that mean? Well, if it doesn't mean literally that he wouldn't so much as look to heaven, because how do you look to heaven anyways? Where is heaven? Anybody know where heaven is? Everybody assumes it's up there. Well, maybe it is, I don't know. But would not so much as look to heaven. Literally, I mean, what I would envision is looking down. But I'm getting the sense that this may not be literal. It might require more thought than just interpreting in a literal sense and moving on. So I'm like, okay, well, not so much as look to heaven. If it doesn't mean that he's just looking down, then one of the more possible interpretations would mean that he doesn't believe in God, would not so much as look to heaven. He doesn't believe in God. Okay, I mean, well, that's the more glaring one, is that he doesn't believe in God. That could be one of the more glaring possible interpretations. Okay. So then I'm like, all right, well, okay, but beat his breast continuously is even more bizarre than would not so much as look to heaven. Well, would beat his breast continuously. And I'm thinking, I don't believe that it means he was physically hitting himself in the chest. So I get a dictionary out, and I'm like, okay, beat his breast. Well, beat. Well, out of curiosity, let's just look up the word beat. And one of the only definitions besides physically beating himself, actually the only other definition that would apply was one of the one definition that would apply. Beat means sought, or to seek, or search, or sought. So I'm like, okay, we're not so much as looked to heaven, but sought. Okay, that's like the grammar of that is correct. We're not so much as looked to heaven, but sought. Okay, sought what? Sought his chest, or sought his breast? What? Well, wait. Let's look up the word breast. So I'm looking at the definitions, and the only other definition that would fit correctly was breast. One definition of the word breast, the only other that would fit, was heart. And I'm like, we're not so much as looked to heaven, but sought his heart. And I'm like, oh, sought his heart. Okay, that makes more sense than physically beating himself. Would not so much as look to heaven, but sought his heart continuously. And so I thought about that, sought his heart continuously, and actually that makes sense. It's like, well, okay, like if I were to seek my heart, that would mean to be like, well, what's the right thing to do? You know, what's the moral, like, right thing to do in any given situation? What does my heart tell me? You know, like the song Heartless, Heartless, sinning in the name of a rock and roll, heartless. We all know what heartless means. You've probably met heartless people. Heartless. I have. And I don't like heartless people, and I don't want to be a heartless person. Heartless people are pieces of shit. Heartless, heartless, sinning in the name of a rock and roll, right? Heartless. Like, you know what heartless is. Why would the band Heart even do that song if people didn't know what heartless means? Well, to seek one's heart continuously is the opposite of being heartless. Nobody likes heartless people. That's why Heart wrote the song, Heartless. Nobody likes heartless people. They're pieces of shit. They're assholes and everything else. So this guy would not so much as look to heaven, which is still pretty vague, but one possible interpretation is that he doesn't really believe in God. Would not so much as look to heaven. Although is another word for but. So he would not so much as look to heaven, which, you know, in the English language could be interpreted allegorically as he didn't believe in God. He wasn't looking to heaven. He would not so much as look to heaven. Although he did seek his heart continuously. So he didn't believe in God, but he wasn't a fucking asshole. He wasn't heartless. He sought his heart. He tried to seek his heart. Like, what do I do? What's the right thing to do? What's the moral thing to do? Well, how do I not be an asshole? How do I not be heartless? Well, one way would be to seek my heart. And if I really care a lot about not being an asshole, maybe it's because I despise heartless people. So I would seek my heart continuously. Where it's like, what do I do? So, would not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continuously. Sought his heart continuously. Would not so much as look to heaven, but sought his heart continuously. That makes more sense than beat his breast continuously. Now, the Bible does say that you shouldn't change the words, but I'm not like physically changing them. Like, I'm just saying, I'm trying to understand this. Would not so much as look to heaven. Well, first of all, what does that even mean? Would not so much as look to heaven. Isn't that the point? Is people should be looking to the heavens? And so if the point of the Bible is to look to the heavens, why would God favor the man who would not so much as look to heaven? Couldn't that mean that he doesn't believe in God? For whatever reason, he's would not so much as look to heaven. Although, even though he wouldn't look to heaven, whatever you think that means, although he wouldn't look to heaven, he beat his breast continuously. So he was just punching his chest constantly. See, that doesn't even make sense anyways. Like, none of that makes any sense. He wouldn't believe in God, but he would punch his chest. See, you see, that doesn't make any sense. But when you get out the dictionary and you look up the word beat and breast, the only other definitions that would fit with that phrase is would not so much as look to heaven, but sought his heart. Then it all starts to make sense. Would not so much as look to heaven, but sought his heart continuously. Really, what that seems to mean is he didn't believe in God for whatever reason, but he did seek his heart continuously, which is basically like he did do the opposite of being heartless. He did seek to try to have a heart. Isn't that the whole point of the Bible? Is to don't be a heartless cunt piece of shit. To have a little heart. Why don't you just have a little heart for your fellow brother? See, don't you understand? So he would not so much as look to heaven, but he did beat his breast continuously. He did punch his chest. You know that's not what it means. He wouldn't look to heaven, but he did beat the shit out of his chest all day. That doesn't make any sense, especially when you compare it to he wouldn't look to heaven, but he did seek his heart continuously. So then when you look at that, then you realize, well, since that makes more sense and it's grammatically correct when you pull out the dictionary, it's grammatically correct and it makes more sense than he was physically hitting himself. And one way to realize that is the word but. So the word but implies that there's a contrast. But there is no contrast between looking to heaven and punching yourself in the chest. And even if there is, it's minuscule in comparison to the contrast of wouldn't look to heaven, but did seek his heart continuously. So that implies he was an atheist or an agnostic. He didn't believe in God, but he did seek his heart continuously, which is the point of the whole fucking Bible, is have a little heart. Don't be a heartless fucking cunt. Hello? Right? So he would not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continually, saying, Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner. And so the argument would be, well, why would he be saying, Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner, if he was an atheist? See, that's where you don't understand. In seeking one's heart is seeking the Lord, whether they believe in God or not. So if an atheist is seeking their heart, that is acceptable in the eyes of God, as God is outlined in this book, which explains right there. It says that God favored the man who would not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continuously, saying, Lord, be merciful to me, under a sinner. He favored that guy over the guy wearing the religious robe with the big cross and the big sign and yelling down the street, everybody believe in God. The most important thing in the whole wide world is to believe in God. God didn't have any respect for that guy. He's like, get this fucking dude out of here. Who is this fucking asshole? Get him out of here. And he had respect for the person who would not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continuously, saying, Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner. And again, you're saying, well, if he didn't believe in God, why would he say, Lord, be merciful unto the sinner? Because, dude, seeking one's heart is the whole point of the Bible. Don't be a heartless fucking cunt. Have a little heart for your fellow man. So by seeking his heart is doing what the Bible says. Is asking like for forgiveness in a sense.
So again, it doesn't matter what a person believes, it's what a person does that matters. Don't you see? That's the whole allegory for the whole thing. It's not what a person believes, it's what a person does. So the guy with the big robe and the big cross and the big sign is announcing to the whole world what he believes. But it's not what a person believes, it's what a person does that matters. So you got the guy with the robe and all that shit proclaiming what he believes to the world, and God had more favor for the guy who would not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continuously. It's not what you believe, it's what you do. And what does beat your breast continuously mean? It means he sought his heart continuously. What does he would not so much as look to heaven mean? Well, I don't know, bro, but one logical interpretation, since we have to look deeper than the surface, is that he didn't believe in God. Would not so much as look to heaven. But, and the word but is very important, and which does verify the implication that he was an atheist. He would not so much as look to heaven. But he did do what the Bible says, which is have a little bit of heart and don't be a heartless fucking cunt. Saying, Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner. Which is basically like he's seeking his heart so that he's not a heartless asshole. And that is really an equivalent of, seeking approval from God. Like, please, fucking, like, I don't want to be a fucking heartless asshole, man. How do I not be a heartless asshole? Or not so much as look to heaven, but beat his breast continuously, saying, Lord, be merciful unto me, a sinner. That's the person that was favored by God over the person that wore the robe with the cross and the big sign and went walking down the street proclaiming loudly that everybody should be believing in God, etc., etc. So it's not what a person believes, it's what a person does.